Hello and welcome to another episode of Who Knew in the Moment, the podcast. I'm your host, Phil Friedrich, and today I'm honored to have Mark Scharnberg with me. Mark is the president of Koteco and also the founder of Build Iowa United Basketball. And one of the things I think you're going to hear about his story today is when you find passion and purpose, it will lead to where you're going. So, Mark, thanks so much for being on today.
Oh, well, thank you for having me.
Absolutely. So to start your journey, yeah, parents had moved to Iowa and started a business, and so you grew up in a you know business owner household and entrepreneurial journey. So talk a little bit about maybe lessons learned early on from a work ethic standpoint. Being in the Midwest, being around a business owner.
Yeah, I think there's quite a few lessons. I think for me, the big ones that my parents instilled in me from an early age is that one was a work ethic, like you were mentioning. My dad made sure I worked every summer from a
Yeah.
very early age. I remember even in middle school, I had to work so many hours.
Yeah.
I think I started out 4 hours a day in the summer, and then every year I had to gain an hour and then it got to where I was in high school where I had to have a job and I could either work for the family business or I had to go find a job. And so some summers, he paid well and I worked for him. And some summers I felt like I could do better elsewhere. And so I found other jobs. So I always had to be working
Yeah.
no matter what we were doing. I was in sports, I was in a lot of other activities, but I always had to have a job. I think
Yeah.
the second thing is some of the lessons that he really instilled in me is just how to manage money, right? And
Mm,
so from a very young age, my parents instilled that I do three things with money, for whether it was given to me or I earned it. Um, I had to first give, so I had to tithe 10%.
yeah.
I saved 20%, and then I could choose to do what I wanted with the 70% that was remaining. And so that was something I really remember and I still use today, to be honest with you. I did it with my own kids. Um, kind of helped me live within my means. I was living on the 70%. Um, it helped me to give, think of others first with my money. And so there's a lot of things that really come out of that.
Yeah.
And as a father, I have three kids and I learned really quickly. I had a giver, I had a spender, and I had a saver. So I had one of each.
I
And
love it.
so it's important to learn how to do all three, not
Yeah.
just there's not one that's better than the other, you know?
Yep.
And so,
Now, one thing that's great that you highlighted there, and maybe you can even speak to it more, is just the percentage side of it, right? And so, if it's dollar amount, the problem is well, it could be significant or insignificant every
mhm.
time, right? If mom and dad said, "Hey, you need to give $5," well, if you had made $10, that $5 is really significant. If you had made $500, $5 is not overly significant. And so, talk a bit about that, and then also just the teaching aspect for your kids.
Yeah, I think, like you said, it's really there's a few principles in there besides the percentages, but the percentages are important, right? So it's kind of following that biblical model of tithing,
Yeah.
which is a tenth, and so that's where the percentages really come in, and also it's giving your best and your first fruits,
Mm,
right? And so, the first thing that I do is I give, and I think the order of importance was important as well. So the first thing we do is give
yeah.
first, and I even take that into when I was working full time. The government doesn't allow you to give first, right? And
Mm,
so it's wanting to take money out of your paycheck before you can even give. So
uh-huh.
there's a battle between government and my giving, and
Yeah.
so I made sure I gave off my gross, not off
Mm,
my net, so that I was giving my first fruits and I was giving a true 10%. Um, and that was just my baseline. I tried to
yeah.
give above and beyond that as well. Um, but that was kind of my baseline. And so again, given the freedom to choose what I wanted to do with the 70% that I was with given, I could either spend it on myself, I could give, I could save it. Um, and so I think there's a lot of lessons in there, to be honest with you.
Yeah.
And I thought it was a very simple model, but very profound. And it really shaped how I see money and how I work and those kind of things. And so um, that's what I wanted to instill with my kids, and I did that from a very early age. So
Absolutely. Now, you referenced tithing and a little bit on your faith life. Um, your dad and or your parents had strong faith life. How did, your faith life grow and maybe tie that into eventually, going to Cedarville?
Yeah, so I was fortunate enough to grow in a Christian home. Um, and my parents took me to church every Sunday. They had devotions with me. Um, they took me, I always went to a Christian school. And so I didn't really look at a lot of colleges, to be honest with you. It really bothered my dad. My dad wanted me to go to like 10 different universities, because me and my dad it's like oil and water. We were totally opposite, right?
Yeah.
And, um, and so from an early age, I just knew I wanted to go to Cedarville, and I
Mm.
can't tell you why. It was a Christian college, and so
Yeah.
I knew I was going to go to a Christian college, and I'm glad I did. After I went to Cedarville, I went to the University of Iowa, which that was a big cultural shock
Yeah.
for me. Um, I knew first day I was on the campus that I was not in a Christian university, and but I'm glad that I waited until after my undergrad because I
Mm.
wasn't really mature enough, to be honest with you,
Yeah.
until then to be on that campus. And but no, it was always a central part of our life, I'd say, and that's why I chose to go to Cedarville.
Yeah. Now, with your time at Cedarville, I think every university can have an impact on, the students there, but what specifically about the university, led to significant impact for you?
You know, um it had an impact for sure because I,
Yeah.
I felt like the education was at a high level. So I being a good steward, I was getting my money's worth
Yeah.
for the education, right? But beyond that, every student that goes to Cedarville has to have a Bible minor.
Mm.
And so by taking that Bible minor and getting an education in the Old Testament and the New Testament and all these doctrines and theologies, things that you really can't gain from just going to church once a week, right?
Yeah.
And so that built a huge foundation for me, and I've used it ever since.
Yeah.
And then every student has to go to chapel every single day,
Hmm.
which I kind of took for granted, to be honest with you, when I went there. But looking back, even though half the time I was just sitting there trying not to sleep, um, it really had a large impact on me, you know?
Yeah.
And so I wish I could go back in time and take more advantage of that. And what I love about Cedarville today with the new president, Dr. White, is that their mission of 1,000 days, right? And so
Mhm.
they see having these college students for about the same amount of time that Jesus had his disciples, right? And
Wow. Yeah.
so their mission isn't just to prepare them for a profession, but to also prepare them to be a missionary wherever God sends them, right? And so that's
Yeah.
why they have them on average for about 1,000 days. And so everything that they do is with purpose to try to prepare them to be a disciple
Mhm.
wherever God sends them. And so that's why I love the mission of Cedarville today. Um, and that changed with Dr. White, that part of it. But chapel every single day, the Bible minor, and we're actually using the Bible minor today in our school at Iowa United. So
Yeah.
our Bible classes are Cedarville's Bible minor, and so they made that available to high schools. And so that's what we're using for our curriculum for our school.
Amazing. Now, after you finish up at Iowa, the next phase of life is coming for you. Hey, do I want to look at the family business? Do I go in a different route? Similar to the summer decision, right? So, talk a little bit
Yep.
about what your mindset was, and then ultimately what you decided to do professionally.
I from an probably from about middle school or high school on, I knew I wanted to work at the family business.
Yeah.
Yeah, even though the summers I didn't work there, I still had a passion for operations and in manufacturing. And so um I worked at a lot of businesses, not necessarily in different industries. For example, I worked at an ice cream factory, and so I loved working at factories, whether it was ice cream or medical devices, it didn't really matter. When I went to Iowa and I was getting my master's, I got to work at, I think it was in Pella, and
Okay.
it was Han Furniture, and it was some of these other factories, and it didn't really matter what the product was. I just love the factory. I love manufacturing. I love
Yeah.
operations. And so I always knew I wanted to come back and work at the family business. So that was an easy one for me, and it was easy for my dad because I was the only child. So the estate planning was very simple. So he
Yeah.
was handing it down to a son, the founder, right, of Koteco, was
Yeah.
handing the business down to a son, his only child, and who also wanted to work in the family business. Now I could have been the worst employee ever
Yeah.
and did a terrible job, and he would have had problems. So there's nothing that's ever problem free, but I actually really enjoyed coming and working there. It wasn't easy. It was one of
Yeah.
the hardest things I ever did, but it was something I always knew I wanted to do. So
Yes. Now, as you're working there and, taking over, the business and the operation, I always think a cliche word is culture, but yet everyone understands that there's something about the, ecosystem of a business that's important. So for you, what do you focus on? What was the emphasis point? Because once again, not every day in business is good, right? It can be hard. There can be challenging seasons, economic things outside of one's control. But what were your main principles and focusing points?
You know, it's tough because I don't really focus on culture a lot.
Yeah.
It There's a lot of people that do. And for me, culture is going to develop no matter if you purposely go after and do it or it doesn't, right? And so it
Hmm.
usually models itself after those at the top, right?
Yeah.
And so um so one of the biggest principles was work for me. I put my head to the grindstone and I just worked and so we eliminated a lot of stuff here, and I just tried to make it very simple for people to work.
Yeah.
And I didn't focus on a lot of other things besides that. And so, and over the years, some of the things, it took me a while to work my way up to the point where I was in a management position or in a leadership position. So, you can kind of erase the first 5 to 10 years of my working at Koteco.
Yeah.
So it's really in the back half where I really was in a position where I could influence the culture of the company. And so, but for that, I really kind of based it off of my the mission statement, which was, I kind of implemented a mission statement which was building innovation for life. And
Huh.
I always like mission statements that are about 4 or 5 words that are very simple but yet powerful.
Yep.
And so out of those three things, building and then innovation and then for life, I could tell you exactly everything, who we are, what we stand for. And so in that, when our purpose was innovation, because at the end of the day, we're a contract manufacturer. And so we don't own the products that we manufacture, our customers do. We own the process. And
Yeah.
so with that being said, the more we can innovate, if we can do it, let's say at a lower cost than our competition, if we can do things that our competition can't do, if there's problems that we can solve that our competition can't, so if we can do some of those things and we could build innovation into our workforce, I knew we would succeed. And so our whole management system that we put together actually built in innovation, and how we divvied up our time, for
Mm.
example. And another key concept is just how to keep things simple.
Mm.
The simpler you can make things, and sometimes it's very hard to make things simple,
Yeah.
but the simpler you make things and set up a culture of discipline,
Yeah.
following a set of rules. And a lot of what I set up at Koteco, we are now using at Iowa United. So
Yeah.
it really doesn't matter if it's a manufacturing facility or business, if it's a nonprofit, if it's a school, if it's a basketball program, it's the same principle. So, with that was a management system that I implemented as well.
Mm.
So it all kind of tied together.
Yeah. Amazing. Now, over the years, as the business, grew, continued to grow and develop, there was, a tremendous amount of success within the business. And upon your mom passing away, you had decided, hey, we would like to make a charitable, gift and donation to a cause that we believe in. So, talk a little bit about, once again, it kind of goes back to those roots of, hey, we give, but talk a little bit about, that season and ultimately that decision to make a large gift.
Well, let me start out with, so my when my mom was working, so it was a family business. So my
Yeah.
dad, started it. he was the CEO. Mom was acting as the CFO, so she was in charge of the purse strings. My grandfather worked here. He'd come down. He was a retired engineer from Telex. And so it was truly a family business. But with her passing, I kind of stepped into that financial role.
Mm.
And so for the first time, I got to determine what we spent money on or, what we should do. And so the couple things that was important to me was the first thing I did was I put a system of giving together.
Mm.
So I knew I wanted to give. And what's hard is when you start to have means, especially if you have means and you are known as someone who gives, the amount of calls you get from
Yeah.
nonprofit are endless. And
Yep.
so in talking with my father, some of the things that was important to us is that we wanted to give a lot to a few
Mm.
instead of a little to a lot, right?
Yeah.
And so by developing a system of giving where we identified the organizations that were important to us that we wanted to give to,
Yep.
um, helped because nonprofits, yeah, it's their job to go out and seek, donors.
Yeah.
But when we have a story to tell, it's not just saying no, but here's why and here's what we're
Yep.
doing. And it made it a lot easier to say no. And so, we picked 5 places, 5 organizations, and we wanted to give 100,000 per month. And we gave twice to each of those
Mm.
organizations. And then there's 2 months where we get to choose, kind of like freebies. We could either give to those organizations or we could give outside those organizations. But every month we're given 100,000. And that was kind of our baseline as a
Yeah.
company. And that's the first thing I did. And the second thing I wanted to do was pay off our debt. And so we were still in debt, our facility, we still had debt on our facility and things like that. And so we wanted to be debt free. And so, but I wanted to give first, set that up, sort of like setting up your standard of living. And so I wanted to kind of build that into our budget. And then any money that we had beyond our bills, we then just paid off our debt. If
Amazing.
there wasn't an investment that we had to make in equipment or facilities and that kind of stuff. And so, fortunate, in a couple of years, we paid off all our debt. We became debt free. We had the system of giving. Cedarville was one of those organizations. My dad was serving on the board of Cedarville. So, there were some organizations that I was serving on as well. And so it wasn't just organizations that we were giving to, it was ones that we were actually serving at, being involved with. And so that was kind of the first year. And then as we progressed, I kind of wanted to follow the Dave Ramsey rule and help these organizations pay off their debt.
Yeah.
And that's probably the hardest, if you're looking for donors and you're a nonprofit and you're seeking giving, you know, debt giving is probably one of the worst or hardest things to raise money for, right?
Yeah.
New buildings or new projects are the easiest.
Yeah. It's exciting.
It's exciting, it's new, you can see the future. The second then it is your budget, your yearly budget, right? That's a little bit harder to ask for, in the world of giving and donors and seeking out people, but debt giving, it's almost impossible. So we wanted to kind of step in and help these organizations that had debt, and so what I started doing by year 2 is routing all the payments or a majority of the payments to one organization to help them pay off the debt. And once that was paid off, then we would move to the next one and the next one. I started with our church and helped them pay off their debt. And then we moved to the next organization and then to the next organization. Um, and so it was in the middle of that we were doing that. And that was kind of our baseline giving for our corporation. This wasn't our personal giving. This was just our company giving. And which leads us to then the bigger gift, right? That
Yeah.
you're probably referring to the Cedarville donation. And, um, you know, I would say when it comes to that giving, it was probably the clearest calling I've ever had
Mm.
to do something. And I remember I used to walk over lunch. It was an over an hour walk around, where our facility is. And I just remember, um, and whenever I work out or whenever I'm walking, that kind of stuff, I usually listen to sermons. That's
Yeah.
kind of my passion is listening to sermons. I don't listen to music, um, or I'm praying. And so it was in the midst of that, I just had this feeling and it wasn't audible. So I'm not saying it was, but it was almost as clear as if it was audible, and it was to give, and it was a certain amount. And so I ended up calling Dr. White, and I just had this feeling about asking for the naming rights because I know they were just entering a large capital campaign. It was over 5 years, and I can't remember what the original number was that they were seeking to raise. It was either 100 million over 5 years, or it was some large number, but they end up almost raising double that in that
Wow.
same time period. And I knew the business building was one of those buildings that was part of this huge capital campaign. And so to honor my father, I was, is the naming rights taken? Is it not? So I called up asking that, and I
Yeah.
didn't know what it would take to get the naming rights. And well, he said, typically to get naming rights on a building, the donor has to give 50% of the cost of the building. And I said, well, what do you think this building's going to cost? And I didn't know if I was going to be able to give enough.
Yeah.
And, so in my head, I had this number like to give 10 million, which is 2 million a year for 5 years. So every 6 months we'd have to come up with $1 million. And, that's the number I thought I could max out at. And when he told me, he's like, well, the right now the budget for the building is 20 million. So somebody would have to give 10 million. And I'm like, well, I'd like to do that. And so I kind of secured it with them over the phone.
Yeah.
And, we did the paperwork. I never told my father. And then what happened was at a chapel, they were honoring him for his years of service. And while he was up on stage, they made this announcement. And I don't know when it actually sunk in that we just signed up to give 10 million.
Yeah.
Uh, but it kind of sunk in at some point. And then the fact that he got the naming rights, which meant a lot because he gave over 20 years of his life to Cedarville on the board, and that was his number one organization.
Yeah.
He loves Christian education, specifically at that college level. Um, so just a way to honor him, and so we
Yeah.
named the business building the Lawrence C. Scharnberg Business Center, I believe. And um, it was kind of cool with my daughter going to Cedarville. Her freshman year was the first year that business building was open.
Oh, wow.
So that was kind of neat. So
It's
maybe
amazing.
not for her,
Yeah.
being known as the person that, the building was named after, or her family, but it was neat for us to see her go to Cedarville and that be her first year. And so, but yeah.
It's amazing. Now, a couple questions come to mind. You think about it as a business and you say, man, that's really taking a lot out of the business that could have been used to expand the business operations. It could have been used for this or that.
Yep.
And you were listening to, I believe, one of these sermons, and a quote came up, and it was, God doesn't give you to increase your standard of living. He gives to you to increase your standard of giving. So
Mhm.
talk a little about that balancing act. I think it's so easy for people, I mean, myself included, right? To be like, gosh, that's money that I could have reinvested into the business. And well, then the business could grow more and all those things. But there's also an element of, like you said earlier, hey, it's biblical, it's belief that I can give and I'll still be, blessed. So talk a little about that juggling act for you and just maybe any encouragement you'd have to others.
Yeah, I would say you don't know what you don't know, and I don't usually like to sign up with commitments to give, right? Because like you just said, I don't know what's going to happen, and here I'm signed up to 10 million over 5 years. And what I didn't realize at the time was COVID was going to happen. And all of a sudden, by year two, we enter into COVID, which we became incredibly unprofitable, right? And because we couldn't ship things out, you couldn't hire people, standard of cost went out of the roof, and so we kept giving regardless, even though I was going backwards. And so it was really the first time I've ever experienced sacrificial giving, and we were sacrificing our business in some respects because like you said, I mean that 10 million could have got us through COVID a lot easier than giving it, right? But I also know that when God calls you to do something big, it's usually a clear calling. And so when you look biblically in the Old Testament, some of the times where God would appear, in front of Moses and, all these guys, right? Well, these are big callings, right? And so I just go back to the fact that this was probably the clearest calling of action that I've ever been given to do. And so that helped, you know, and it wasn't something that I just kind of thought up. It literally stopped me in my tracks, and it was almost as if God spoke to me audibly, which it wasn't audible, but it was that real. And so that it didn't make it easy, but I knew what I needed to do, whatever happened, right? And so the other thing that I learned in that same lesson that you were describing is that you know, along with that, if you give, because you know, at the end of the day, what I have is God's, right? God's given to me. I'm a steward, and He hasn't given to me, like you said, to increase my standard of living, but to increase my standard of giving. And when I heard that in the following point, which is, if I end up giving everything beyond, then it the stress of trying to hang on to everything just left, right?
Mm, yeah.
Because you know, you build up this business, and you know, I mean, it could be taken away. I mean, anything
Yeah.
can go. You know, our business could shrink, and and so that's always a big fear. You know, like all of a sudden, like you keep getting this bigger and bigger pie, and then all of a sudden it starts to leave. Well, if you're giving it away anyway, it doesn't matter how big of a pie you have.
Yeah.
And so all of a sudden, that stress and that fear of hanging on to what God's given me, just left. You know, and I had this peace, and um, and so that's where that really helped. And then I ended up I think all of these things kind of played a part into going into giving this gift, and going through COVID, and going through something that you could never predict, and you're in the middle of this storm,
Right.
and I've never gone through something like this before, you know, this worldwide pandemic. It seemed like the world was going crazy. Uh, I've never seen every single material go up like it did. It
Yeah.
did that twice. Labor shot up just to get good labor. I mean, everybody was competing for the same little labor pool that was available. I mean,
Yeah.
the challenges that we went through during COVID, I would never would want to go through again in
No,
business. And at the same time, we're coming up with $1 million every 6 months.
it's amazing.
And so, like I said, we came out of it, and I kind of knew coming out of it that God was going to reward that somehow.
Yeah.
It could be now in the physical, or it could be later in
Yeah.
eternity, but I
Yeah.
just knew that if I was obedient, that God would reward that. And you know, as a business goes, we almost increased in sales 50% coming out of COVID. And so all of a sudden now we're at a different level, and we've paid back all the money that we had to borrow going through COVID, and we're a stronger business today than we've ever been. And I just know it's because of what we did, and the obedience that we had going through it, you know.
Yeah.
And my dad had no issue with it either. You know, he grew up, you know, as a farmer. His dad was a pastor as well, and they had nothing. I mean, you talk about having nothing, and that's what he. So when you grow up with nothing, um, you know, those kind of things, you know, you're not attached to those things, I'd say. And so for him, it was even easier, you know, because
Yeah.
I grew up with a better standard of living than he did,
Mm,
you know, and so, but yeah, yeah, God taught me a lot through that time period. So
amazing. Well, as businesses, continue to go well, a passion of yours is, helping grow people, and so you come up with an idea of the Iowa United basketball program. So talk a little about, where the idea spawned from, and then talk about really what the mission and the goal is right now of the program.
So the idea came about because I've got three children. My
Yeah.
oldest is my daughter, and then I've got two sons. And there was a time period, you know, when you study family businesses, you know, by the third, fourth generation, things tend to not go well, right? And
Yeah.
I didn't know if my kids wanted to come and work in the family business like I did, you know. And you know, these two of my kids were in high school, and one was in middle school, and so I was kind of brainstorming business ideas with my wife about what they may want to do
Yeah.
after college. And, you know, trying to explain to my kids, as a business owner, there's really two ways to make money, right? One is as an owner, and you make money off the stock, and if there's distributions, things of that nature, or you could actually work in the business and earn a salary. And so I wanted to make sure they knew that they had freedom to work elsewhere,
Mm.
and I didn't want them to feel like they were coming back because they had to.
Yeah.
And so we were coming up with ideas, and I had an idea sort of for each one of them, not really knowing what they wanted to do. And my middle son, um, my middle child, which is my oldest son, I should say, um, for him, it was, he loved basketball. And so we
Yeah.
kind of had an idea to do a basketball program of some sort, either an AAU program or something, right? That he could come back and work at, after college, after he graduates. And what ended up happening was his AAU program imploded, and we were out looking for another program, and we really didn't love the AAU model. And AAU is the summer program.
Yeah.
For middle school down, it's year round, but for high school, it's usually in the summer. And what I don't love about that model is that as an AAU program, you can recruit within your state or
Yeah.
one state away, right? But the problem is that, and there's a lot of pressure to do that because you got to put these all-star teams together
Right.
to be able to get on a shoe circuit. And the whole
Yeah.
goal is to get on a shoe circuit so you can recruit. And so is this never-ending struggle to be on a shoe circuit and to recruit, right?
Yep.
And and so in looking at it, 2 out of the 3 months that you're playing AAU, you're in school. So there's just no practices, there's no basketball development. It's pretty
Yeah.
selfish basketball anyway. And so when we were trying to consider, my wife and I were considering this, we're like, do we just try to go to another AAU program, which is pretty similar? They all have similar problems.
Yeah. Right.
Or do we just, my wife was like, this idea that you had for Jameson, to do something in basketball after he graduates. Well, why don't we do it now so he can actually benefit from it,
Amazing.
and then he can go to college and then come back and work at it, And so
Yeah.
we decided to start an AAU program. I had a couple weeks to do it. And so we went all in. I was fortunate enough to meet a couple of people. Um, there was a gentleman that I knew from our high school that was coaching, that ran AAU programs before, so
Mm.
he was my first hire.
Yeah.
I was also connected with somebody else that was a previous coach and that knew a lot of people that helped me start this program as well. And so Iowa United really started as an AAU program that was based on development.
Yeah.
And so the rule is that it was high school boys only. So we had 3 teams, 15, 16, and 17U. And it was based on development, which is we went out and sought out D1 level coaching, and we had daily practices. You had to be within an hour's drive because you're expected to come every day after
Yeah.
school. We provided weight training and performance training through D1, and then we had skills training. So we had all 3 things
Mm.
that we were offering. We ended up buying a building. It was a warehouse that we were leasing through COVID,
Yeah.
and so we ended up freeing up that warehouse, and so I ended up buying the building and then designing the front half, the practice facility.
Amazing.
And the idea was to have it for these local kids to have a place to go play year round, even though AAU is only for 3 months. But
Yeah.
they always had a gym that they could go and keep practicing at and things like that. And so that's what really started the idea. We got through that first season, or we're probably in the middle of that first AAU season, and my wife and I were talking, and to do it right, instead of hiring these contractors to come in and coach and then do it for 3 months, we said, to do this right, we really have to go year round.
Yep.
And so then we ended up deciding to do a prep school. And so we were using the prep school for 7, 8, 9 months for games, and then we're using the summer AAU program for games in the summer.
Yeah.
But the whole idea was development. And we've this is our 3rd year of AAU. We've
Yeah.
completed 2 school seasons, and now we have decided to go back to, not going back, but we've decided to change one more time, and we're going this next fall, we're only gonna be a school.
Yeah.
We're dropping the AAU side. And there's things that you learn along the way. We had these grand ideas, and some of them work, some of them don't. And trying to do both an AAU program in a school just did not work. As
Yeah.
much as we'd like to do a year-round development program, um, that was really tough.
Hmm.
And there's 1,000 reasons why it just did not work. And so um, I'm one. I don't mind admitting when something doesn't work and changing courses.
Yeah.
Sometimes I almost do that too fast, and I don't give things a try. But we gave this a try for 3 sessions, and
Yep.
so going in the fall, we're only a prep school. I'd say only,
Yeah.
but we're going to be a prep school focused on development. So
Amazing. Now, for you guys, are there specific players that you're, going after? Is it an application basis? How do you guys kind of, bring in the players, and how many people are you trying to attract, each year to
yeah.
the program?
So in our program, there's only 24 spots. We've got two teams. We have Team Orange and Team Black. Team Orange is going to be typically younger guys and guys that we're going to do more development with.
Mm,
And then Team Black is kind of our national team or our EYBL Scholastic team.
yeah.
And there, our goal is to win a championship. And so we're going to go after players that are more uh, really ready. It's more about exposure. So I think that the two things in our program is about development and exposure. And so the younger you are, the more development it is, and the older you are, it's more about exposure.
Yeah.
And and so yes, my coaching staff for each team is really responsible for the recruitment.
Mhm.
For Team Black, they're more sniping. They're going after players that they
Yeah.
know and that they want. Not to say that there aren't agents or handlers or college coaches that recommend players, um, because at the end of the day, this is a heavily relationship type business,
Yes.
and so it's really who you know
Yeah.
and being familiar with people. And so the coaching staff that I have is really working on some players now to recruit for this next upcoming season. For Team Orange, it's probably a mixture of both. It's heavily, we're also an international program, so we're heavily on the international side.
Yeah.
And I would say that to date, sending your athlete as a U.S. family was tough until about the junior senior year.
Mm,
And
yeah.
so typically it's always been more international. Now that's changing
Yeah.
because the amount of money that's being offered in college and trying to get a good foundation. And the issue is that the local high school that's usually governed by a lot of rules, kind of like the NCAA is for
Yeah.
college, they're not designed to help athletes become elite basketball players.
Right.
I feel like the rules at the high school level are designed to do two things. One is to encourage multi-sport.
Mm.
So you can't even start playing basketball until football's over,
Yeah. Right. Right.
where we don't have those rules.
Yeah.
And then the other thing it's designed to do is to try to create an even playing field. And we're doing everything we can to create an uneven playing field.
Right.
And so everything we do is to try to give our athletes an advantage. And
Yeah.
so the investment we're making in our athletes, it's about 100 to $150,000 per year per athlete in just
Wow.
development. That's just our yearly budget. That doesn't count the facility, that doesn't count other things, but that's just the investment we're making in development for the guys that are entering into our program. So
Amazing. Now, within the program, do you have a mission and a vision for the program? 2 years, 5 years, 20 years down the road, other than Jameson coming back and taking over?
yeah, I do. There's several missions I would say. There's the Iowa United mission, which is our mission statements: unite, develop, achieve.
Mm,
And so again, we want to be the premier, I'd say, basketball development program, high school development
yeah.
program in the world. We want to be the best.
Yep.
And so with that being said, I think with college now going pro like it
Mm,
has, that's going to have a profound effect on high school,
for
at
sure.
least with the elite high school basketball players.
Yeah.
And so this change is coming and it's already started, right?
Yeah.
And so we want to be there. We want to be on the ground floor of this change and we want to be the best, right? That's our goal. Whether we are or not, that time will tell.
Yep.
But that's our mission.
Yeah.
I'd say personally, I have quite a few different missions. So Iowa United is kind of an indirect mission for my wife and I. So We serve there. We live in the facility. We're the ones that are taking care of these boys at night
Yeah.
when the staff goes home. And the school that we have is a Christian school. And so my wife and I also take athletes to church on Sundays, the ones that want to go. So we make that, that offer. Other
Right.
staff members take athletes to church, different churches, and and so it's kind of an indirect mission. I also wanted to, with I don't know how to phrase this, but when you're a family of means, and my three kids are growing up with a better lifestyle than I did growing up under my father, right?
Yep.
And that can ruin a family. That can ruin
Absolutely.
people. And so what typically happens is when you have means, you tend to set up your life to be served, right? And so
Yeah.
I'm paying somebody to mow my yard. I'm paying somebody to clean my house. I'm paying for all these people uh, to work for me and to make my life easier. And so I thought it was very important that with my children that we become a family that serves.
Hmm.
And
Yeah.
so we're in this facility. We're serving these guys. I got up this morning. I did towels already. Uh, I'll do the rounds. And so now my kids not only hear that from me, but they see me doing it, right?
Yeah.
And then they're participating in that. And so I can see this being, one important decision that I'm up against is whether or not to sell my family business, right?
Oh,
Koteco.
yeah.
And so my father passed away last September. As long as he was alive, I would never even entertain it
Yeah.
because he would never want that. But now that he is gone, it's kind of in my decision. What do I do with the family business?
Yeah.
And I'm kind of at a fork in a road, per se. Do I start selling it to my children, right? Pass it on to skip
Yep.
the inheritance tax, or am I going to sell it someday? And my wife, and it really comes down to whether my kids want to come back there and work, and
Yeah.
and really none of them have shown that strong desire to do so.
Yeah.
And so we talked it out as a family, and our decision is that we're going to sell at some point. And I want to be able to sell it when I don't need to sell it.
Hmm. Yep.
I'm 52 years old. I don't need to sell it, but at some point I want to sell it before I need to sell it because that puts you in your best position.
Yeah.
But but that's the decision that we've made, and so all our decision making going forward is with this decision in mind. And so Iowa United becomes almost like a retirement
Yeah.
plan. So this is where I'm going to work going forward. My wife works there. Yeah, I can envision all three of my kids coming back working there if they want. They don't have to. Um, and so that's kind of more on a personal note, I would say, with
Yeah.
Iowa United. It's a passion project. That's one of the great selling points to these
Yeah.
athletes that we're recruiting. I want nothing from them.
Right.
I'm not out. I'm not making money off of them.
Yep.
I've taken $0 in. Everything has been donated by my wife and I. It's 100%. No, at some point, will we try to do things that will develop like sponsors and things like that?
Okay.
Possibly, but I also started it with in mind knowing that I can fund it
Hmm.
because I want to be able to set it up the way I want to be able to set it up,
Right.
and I didn't want it to have to answer to others. And so that's why we haven't taken a dollar from anybody else,
Yep.
because it's given us the freedom to set up the way we want to set it up. And it's also a great selling point to these families. Like, this is just us wanting to give back,
Yeah.
you know, and it's, even with all that being said, it's not right for everybody.
Yep.
And so in the recruiting process, it's a little bit like dating.
Yeah.
You're trying to find and see if you're compatible. Is
Yep.
our mission and what we're trying to accomplish the same as yours?
Right.
And I say there's three things to be great. One is talent. This is the blessing that God gave these athletes, right?
Yeah.
They're blessed with height, with strength, with
Hmm.
with athletic ability. They have great potential.
Yeah.
And then what we're providing is the opportunity. If there's
Yeah.
anything that can help them achieve success, we're making that investment.
Yep.
But the third thing, and probably the most important, is just their work ethic.
Yeah.
And that we can't control and we can't force it. And so we're looking for athletes that have the same desire for themselves. And we want to spoil them. And this is the same model that I use with my kids. I want to spoil my kids,
Yeah,
but I don't want them to act spoiled.
that's
And
right.
so there's a big difference with that, and I want
Yeah,
to be able to give, but I want these athletes that join Iowa United, but they need to work.
yep,
And yes, we can, with our coaching staff, we do push them, right? But at the end of the day, they have to make that decision. And so one of the biggest things that I think that we're trying to give to these athletes is just healthy habits. And that's one of them, is a good, strong work ethic,
yep.
and so as a staff, we're working hard on their behalf. And so that's probably one of the biggest things that we're looking for in recruiting is not only highly talented athletes, but ones that, want to get better,
Yeah,
that works really hard, has a strong motor, that kind of stuff. So
so good. I love it. Well, Mark, I appreciate you hopping on and sharing your journey, and excited to see all the amazing things you guys are going to do in both businesses. But I'm sure we'll be doing this again in 2 or 3 years and talking about all the national success Iowa United's continued to have.
we hope so. I appreciate it. Thank you for the time and really good to meet you too. So